Hey everyone, Pat Belliveau, Greg Bush here again. This is video 6 of just us, but video 8 of the series. We've had 2 guests so far, and we're planning on having more guests here in the future, but just have a little bit more to go through.
Yeah.
Just here. So this is again, this is also November 22nd, same as video 5, and I'm going to start the timer, and here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Picking up where we left off.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to.
I'll drink to that.
I was trying to keep things in a bit of a timeline, but it's kind of difficult as we just kind of riff off of all of this stuff and go in various directions. So
yeah, so many different places to go.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So I think I was talking about my my Ontario days, my Hamilton days, and teaching at Mohawk and McMaster and stuff like that. Which, yeah, pretty good memories of those places too.
How long were you there for total?
I was there from '94 to 2003, so 9 years. Yeah. Yeah, so you're teaching at Mohawk. The first year I got there was full-time, a sabbatical replacement. Then it was part-time, and then at McMaster part-time, then a sabbatical replacement at McMaster. And that was a challenge to be full-time at McMaster and part-time at Mohawk, but I was able to juggle it and make it work. And then kind of part-time at both, and then teaching privately and playing gigs and stuff, was able to make it happen. And yeah, I met a lot of good musicians. You mentioned before we were doing this, Rob Somerville, who I've lost track of. And if whoever's watching this, go look up Rob Somerville, trombone player. Look him up on YouTube. I don't know.
He's Toronto-based, right?
Toronto-based, yeah. And I don't know if he does a lot of stuff as a leader, but a lot of stuff as a side person. And he's a ridiculously good trombone player and the nicest guy going. And one of the most unlikely guys to do pranks. So because of the theater scene at the time in Toronto with Mervish Productions and all of that stuff, and also Stratford with musical theater and shit like that. So there were, even in Hamilton, and other Oakville, there were theater companies putting on shows. I did Wizard of Oz. I think the theater company in Oakville did it 2 years, maybe 3 years in a row, but 2 for sure. And well, I digress for a minute. So talking about musicians being funny, we're in the pit for Wizard of Oz in Oakville, and we get notes, right? You know how you get notes for these things? So from the director and the producer. So the note is that the musicians are being just a little bit too loud into the pit and need to turn it down a bit because the audience could hear us chuckling, whispering chuckling, but the laughter's getting a little bit too loud. So I show up the next day to the show, and one of the woodwind players, freaking hilarious, band teacher's probably retired now, good woodwind player, woodwind doubler. He got there early and he strung across the pit 2 tin cans with a piece of string so that we could whisper the jokes across the pit. Needless to say, it didn't work all that well. And we got another note saying, seriously, you guys need to tone it down. It was so funny. Oh my gosh, we were losing our shit, for Pete's sake. But the Rob Somerville story. So we're doing City of Angels, and every director wants to put their own little spin on these things, right? So rather than be in a pit, we're on a balcony on the stage. We're part of the set, right? Stairway going up to the balcony. So after one of the shows, early on in the run, we got the call saying, okay, we'd like you guys to come in a little bit earlier tomorrow so that we can go over one of the numbers with the singer. They're not feeling as confident as they would like to. So if you guys could indulge us and come 20 minutes earlier than whatever the call was, we can run that thing and then dominate the show. So nobody had a problem with that, of course. So, and because we were on the stage, uh, just as they were opening the house, we had to make sure that we were off the stage. And then, like 5 minutes or 2 minutes before they're ready to hit it, we would take the stage. The producers and the directors didn't want us on the stage while the audience was filing in. Fair enough. So anyway, we go over this this piece with the singer. So it's like, okay, we're done. Okay, you guys can come down and wait for the call to take your places. So I'm like right by the steps. I'm the closest one to the stairs to go down. And so I'm the first one down the steps, right? And I hear Rob Somerville go, "Oh my gosh, oh no, oh gosh, Greg, oh no." And I'm like, I turn around and I look, and here's this, what appears to be a trumpet clanging down the stairs, right? He's knocked my trumpet off the stand and down the stairs. And I'm like looking at, they said my face went white. They said they wished
Oh,
they
I'm
were
sure it did.
picture of it. Because I'm like, yeah, okay, I have a spare. I have another trumpet. I'm not like some trumpet players that have like 19. I have two friends in town. They have probably about 18 trumpets each. I have three. And I think I probably had the three at the time. So I'm like, I'm watching this and I'm like, it's 20 to 8. It's 20 minutes home and 20 minutes back. I don't have time to go get my spare. And what the frick am I going to do? And as I'm watching it, I'm like, wait a second. A gig a couple of weeks ago, and I probably took the gig a little bit too soon. My chops weren't really up to par, and they're like, "Yeah, we heard about that."
Right.
That's you're only as good as your last gig.
Yeah.
The
I
it
was
seems
quite shocked how much ground that story made in such a short amount of time.
well, it's a great story, man.
But the other thing that people that is not really shared first is that I remembered what tune it was, and it was a song called "Samba de las Gatos" by Mike Steinell, who was teaching trumpet at North Texas at the time. I assume he probably still is. We gave Rob McConnell a chord sheet to play a solo. So he played a solo. After he was done his solo, and there was another solo happening, he put his horn down on his horn stand. He picked up the chord chart, proceeded to pretend like to blow his nose in it first. Then he ripped it in half, threw both pieces up in the air. One of them came down and landed at his feet, and that's when he picked it up and stuck it in. At Chaos, they had candles on the table, and he stuck the chart in the candle and held it up to burn it. And the people in the audience were just like, "What in the hell is this guy doing?" It was just weird. But you know what? And it's I know on the videos here, this video series, the ones that I did before you and I started this video series, I had a couple Rob McConnell, or one main Rob McConnell story when I played with him in the quintet, which was like 2 days later or 3 days later, when he was pulling tricks on me on stage. I didn't know this because I was like probably 26, 27. So I didn't know that he was yanking my chain, but I spoke to Guido Basso after when Guido came to town. He said, "Oh yeah, he likes you. He's just screwing with you." I'm like, "Well, I didn't know that." It's like, I thought this guy is seriously off his nut. Because he would do things like he'd put his horn down and he'd look at us and go, "What do you clowns want to play now?" Stuff like that. And then there was that story where we finished the tune, he put his horn on the stand, and I'm opposite him on the stage, and he just looks at me and he goes, "Call a tune," like in that tone of voice. I'm just like, I drew a blank for a second. The first thing that comes to mind to me is, "I'll Remember April." And he goes, "Fuck, I hate that tune. Sunny Side of the Street, C. 1, 2, and we ended up with Sunny Side of the Street. I'm sure I could have said anything. I could have said Sunny Side of the Street, and he would have said, "Fuck, I hate that tune." And we would have launched into something else, I'm sure. But anyway, and then when he threw the ice at me, he called Just Friends. He plays Just Friends in B flat. So he called Just Friends, and during my solo, the album that the Boss Brass did with Mel Torme, there's that tutti section where it goes be-doo-dup, ba-ba-be-doo-dup, ba-da-dee-ba-doo-dup, ba-ba-doo-dup. I started playing that in my solo because I'd been listening to it over and over again. I internalized that part. So I started playing that in my solo, and he was sitting at a table in the front. It was an empty table, and there was a rag and an empty glass of ice water. So he grabbed the glass and he started picking out ice cubes. He would just do this. He was flicking them at me, and I'm dodging ice cubes as I'm playing this. And then when he runs out of ice cubes, he picks up the rag and he throws that at me. So I'm dodging a rag. And then as it's coming around to the top of the course, he comes running up to the stage, grabs his horn, and says, "Play it again." So then we played it together. And then at the end of that, he kicks off into his solo.
That's
I was just
freaking
like,
hilarious, man.
wow. Okay. And like I say, I think I was 27, 26, 27. I'm now just about to turn 54, and I'm still telling that story.
Yeah, well, it's a freaking great story, man.
Wow. And then I
Man.
told Guido all that stuff. He goes, "Oh, man, he likes you." I'm like, Jesus, what does he do when he doesn't like you? Slash the tires or something?
That's right. That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Well, the other one that Rob Somerville did, and I wasn't in the pit for this, and this was closer to Toronto. I think it was in Mississauga at the Stage West there. If it's still there, I don't know. And it was West Side Story.
Oh, yes.
And again, the musicians were up on a balcony, but they were not part of the set. They were behind a curtain and a screen and shit, but they were on a balcony rather than in a pit. And then in West Side Story near the end, there's quite a stretch where there's no music.
Yeah.
And so they had asked the musicians to turn their lights out. I went to one of their performances, but I wasn't at the performance where this event takes place. So Rob Somerville goes and he buys some kind of a electrical gadget so that he has control of the musical director's music stand light.
Really? Oh boy, I can see where this is going.
So they get to that spot in the show, right, where they're turn their lights off. So Rob waits a few seconds, turns the switch, the light comes on. So the guy goes, fiddles with it. Rob turns it off. So the musical director sits back down. A few seconds later, a minute later, the light comes on. Guy goes and fiddles with it. Rob turns it off. Apparently did it like 5 or 6 times to the point where the guy was down at the bottom of the music stand looking at the plug where it's plugged in. And then Rob starts flicking it on and off a little bit. That's when the guy caught on, and Rob's sitting there with a big grin on his face, and they're trying to not laugh, because they're on the stage, or they're at least in a situation where had they been laughing, that you would have been able to hear them, But I wasn't there for that event, but I was there for the show. That was another story that made the rounds. And I remember Rob coming up to me after he pranked me, and he's like, "I guess I should be looking over my shoulder." And I was like, "Maybe." I said, "How the heck am I going to top this one?" I said, "I think you're good." I said, "If I'm going to prank you back, it needs to be, we need to be trying to one up one another." I said,
It'd have
I
to be
can't.
pretty epic.
Yeah, I was like, "I can't see how I could one up this one, dude." I said, "You got it." I said, "Fear nothing from me." I said, "I can't come up with anything." But he's just a very, very good trombone player and a super, super nice guy. But
yeah, I have met him before.
And clearly a good sense of humor, and the least likely guy that you would expect to pull that shit is so funny.
Nice.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So let's maybe go from Hamilton, and now you got the call to go to Texas. So how did that all come about?
Yeah. Well, I was always after that elusive tenure track gig with the teaching and stuff at McMaster and at Mohawk, always being sessional or part-time or whatever. I always wanted to be, to have a tenure track gig. And I remember at the time there was an opening at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, if that's what it's called. I think it's U of M.
Yep,
And
that's right.
this predates when they started their jazz program. And but the job description I thought suited me. It wasn't as if it said, okay, must play the saxophone and all that bullshit. It kind of suited me, And then one of my colleagues at McMaster sent me the advertisement for the gig in Texas. So I applied for both of them, and I was like, "Yeah, you watch this. The one that's farthest away might probably would be the one that would come through." So anyway, I got a letter from University of Manitoba saying thanks, but no thanks. And then, as what we often do is you always contact them, say, "Okay, what can I do to strengthen my application for the next round, or whatever." And I remember the guy saying, "Well, it just wasn't a good fit." He says, "We have a trumpet player on the faculty, so the position, as much as it didn't specify a particular instrument, um, not that interested in having, two trumpet players, so it went to somebody else." I was like, "Yeah, fair enough." He says, "So your application was quite strong other than that." And then I kind of forgot about the application in Texas. I was like, never even got a response saying they'd received my application. And then one day, weeks later, out of the blue, I get a phone call. It's like, "Yeah, so this is so and so from Abilene Christian University, and do you have time to chat on the telephone?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." He's like, "Do you have time to, we'll make it a phone interview." I was like, "Yeah, I got the time." So yeah, so it was like, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, and he's asking me all sorts of questions and shit. And and then a few days later, he calls me again, or I get an email and says, "Okay, we'd like to fly you down here for an interview." I was like, "Cool, okay, well, let's do it." So we set that up, and it was all jazz courses. It was jazz combo, the big band, a jazz methods class, orchestration class, and the trumpet students. And so that suited me just fine. And I was like, okay. So then everything's arranged, in terms of booking the flight down there. Then they call and they're like, "Okay, so um, it would be really helpful. We'll fly you to DFW airport." W, yeah,
W,
Christ,
of course.
W.
Yep.
So and then we can get this package where the flight goes to Dallas, and then you'd have to drive yourself in a car rental to Abilene, but we can save a whole pile of money by doing that. And of course, you want to, make a good impression. So I was like, "Yeah, sure, that's not a problem." I was like, "How long is it going to take?" He's like, "Yeah, well, maybe 3 hours. And the plane got in, I think, mid to late afternoon. So I don't know, like 4 o'clock, maybe by the time I cleared customs and all of that business and got the car, maybe I was on the road by 5 o'clock, let's say. So it's not like I was going to pull into Abilene at 1 in the morning. And I remember it was pretty straightforward to get there because the traffic and the roads that you can imagine in a city the size of Dallas, but the signs were fine. And then I remember as I'm getting towards the outskirts of town, or didn't have so many twists and turns to make, I'm seeing all of these billboards advertising air conditioners. And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. It must get pretty damn hot here in the summertime." So, and then I needed a break, in terms of just getting a cup of coffee or a snack or something. And I was told that when I got to Abilene, the guy would take me out for dinner. So I didn't want to have a huge meal, but I needed to have a bite to eat. I pulled into this place, off of the highway, and there were these glass cases, on the walls in between the booths, and of course they all had guns in them, right? And I'm like, "Oh, WTF, man? What am I getting into here?" So yeah, but before that all went down, the guy says to me, he says, "Okay, so you'll work with a trumpet student when you get here. You'll work with a trumpet student. We want to see you do that, and we want to hear you play. So we've arranged a rhythm section for you." And I don't think I had to teach a class of any sort. It was just a trumpet lesson. So I was like, "Yeah, no problem." So then about 3 days before I'm scheduled to fly down there, the guy calls me up and he's like, "Okay, so we'd like to hear you play a classical piece." And I'm like, "Oh shit, really?" He's like, "Yeah, Haydn's trumpet concerto or something." And I'm like, "That's not gonna happen." I was like, "I don't have the chops. I'd have to practice that for like a month to get that up to being able to perform it." I said, "It's a completely different style and challenge in terms of endurance and stuff like that." He's like, well, it would be in your best interest to do that. And I was like, yeah, well, I don't think I can. And he's repeating himself, it would be in your best interest. So finally, I choose this piece. It's like a high school level classical contest piece, that I'd been helping my trumpet students with. And I knew I could play that. So I sent it to him, and he calls me back and he's like, yeah, that's not really a substantial enough piece. And I was like, that's about as good as it's going to get at this short notice. And he's like, it needs to be longer. And I was like, well, I don't know. I could repeat some sections or whatever. He's like, well, could you improvise an introduction to it? I was like, well, now you're talking. I said, I can freaking improvise for 5 minutes on this. So he's like, okay, why don't you do that so that, you're going to be playing more than 3.5 minutes. Maybe the piece was 5 minutes. So anyway, I was like, cool, no problem. So I send him piano part down there, of course. So I get to I'm in Abilene. We're having a rehearsal with the piano professor, right? Which is the topic of another story. Christian University, right? Clearly the guy's gay. Would never come out at the university, but it got the better of him. Very sad. Well, not sad, but just as the way the events unfolded. Married with two children, two little kids. Finally, when he comes out, has to quit the university, leaves his wife and his kids, and he moves to Dallas with his partner, his male partner. It's a shame the way they treat those people. We can get into that later because I have very strong thoughts about that. So anyway, he shits the bed playing the piano accompaniment part because clearly he hadn't freaking practiced it. It's another one of these classical snobs is like, I can sight read anything. Well, he couldn't. So anyway, I felt better. I was like, well, if he's shitting the bed, it's not going to matter if I cack a few notes. Because the people that were sitting in on the rehearsal, they were like, and he shit the bed in the same place on the performance. But which was fine, and then it put me at more at ease. Like I said, if he's shitting the bed, then I'm looking good. So yeah, I played this long, elaborate, improvised introduction, and he's like, "Well, how will I know when you come in?" I was like, "Well, I'm going to state the theme of the tune at the end of it. You'll know. I'll make a clear definition of it. Come to an end. Short of going da 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 da. I said, you'll know that I'm ending. We start the piece. So we got through all of that, and then later on after that, oh yeah, the other thing was that the trumpet student had chosen the Aratunian trumpet concerto for me to help him with. Of the big three, Hummel, Haydn, Aratunian, Aratunian is probably the most challenging. So I'm crapping myself. So on the plane, talk about Bobby Shue would dig this because he was all over this idiokinetic thing, right? Where you're listening, going through the motions and the sound and everything and all this stuff. So I'm on the plane with, this is back in the day of a Discman, and I got the disc in and I got my headphones and I got the piece and I'm fingering through it and I'm listening to it. So and listening to it in the car and on the drive. So by the time I got there, I listened to the piece like 50 times and had gone over it. And of course, which part did the kid pick? The easiest part of the whole concerto, because he doesn't want to be shitting the bed and looking like a doofus either. So I got through that okay. And then I had to play with the rhythm section, which you played with these cats. It was Henry on keyboard, African American guy on piano. Was
Okay.
he on the gig that we did? Because
At the club?
no, when we went and played at that party.
At the pool, on the pool
Yeah,
side.
who was the piano player? It was probably Henry and
Okay.
Dave Cowan on bass and Alan wasn't a wasp
Wooden
Teal.
Wasp. What about
Oh, it was probably Michael Henry Martin.
I was just going to say Michael Martin Murphy or whatever his name,
Michael Henry
whoever,
Martin.
Michael Clark Duncan or Olivia Newton-John, whatever, with three names. I could.
Yeah, he's since passed away. He passed away a couple of years ago.
Michael Philip Martin.
Michael Henry Martin.
Michael Henry Martin.
Yeah, he's the cat.
I still can't get it apparently, but anyway, all
he's
right.
the cat. I'd phone him up and I'd get his answers machine and he'd say, "Yeah, I can't come to the phone right now. I've got a rash." And then another time I phone, he's like, "I can't come to the phone right now. I am incognito." Very very funny guy. So it's probably him on the guitar and not Henry on the piano.
Mhm.
But the rhythm section, they played fine. I played a bunch of tunes, and I ended up getting the gig because they said that my Anglican background was closer to their evangelical thing. The other person they interviewed was Catholic, and they thought that the Anglican thing was, well, Episcopalian was closer to their concept of the evangelical thing than the Catholic. It's like really, not to mention the fact that they liked the way I played and the way I did the did all of the interviews and stuff like that.
Right.
So and I remember I wore a suit and tie, and it was in May. It was 94 degrees, whatever that is in Celsius. I was freaking
That
dying.
would be mid to high 30s, I'm sure. Almost
Yeah,
40,
I was
probably.
dying. This is in May. I'm dying of the heat.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of it all, I'm back at the motel room, and I'm like, I need a drink. I need to like just freaking chill out here and have some kind of an alcoholic beverage, which they sell in the gas stations over there. So I go to the gas station across the street from the hotel, and I get a 6-pack of something that was like a Mike's Hard Lemonade or something like that, because they wouldn't have had wine and I don't drink scotch and that stuff. I don't drink hard liquor, but beer or wine or coolers or something would have suited me. So I was like, okay. So I get back to the room and I freaking pound back one of those cooler type drinks, and sometimes after just half of one, you could feel a little bit of a buzz, especially if you haven't. Well, I'm a lightweight, especially if I haven't eaten or something. So I make short work of one and feel just fine. I crack open another one, have a few sips, and I'm like, what the hell? And I look at the ingredients. It's beer based. It's malt based. It's not hard liquor based. I poured the rest of the shit down the drain. I was like, well, I was freaking wasted time and effort. I was like, I'm not gonna pound back 6 of these to like have a little bit of a buzz or whatever. So I just kind of chilled out on my own. I was like, I was kind of weird. And then I ended up getting the gig,
Mhm.
and seemed like a good idea at the time, but in hindsight, oh my gosh, what a place! Jeez, well, you can imagine the state just voted. I think that within the whole state, the majority of the state voted for Trump,
Mhm.
and that kind of sums it up, in terms of their mentality. And at the time that I was down there, George W. Bush was in office, and with my last name and my first name initial. Numerous times I had people ask me if I was related to him. It got kind of tedious. I remember at one point in a gas station or whatever, a guy says, "Ah, you're related to George W." I was like, "Yeah, actually, he's my uncle." "He's your uncle, is he?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Wow, does he ever take any of your advice? Does he ever ask you for your advice?" I said, "Shit, all the time." I said, "I give it to him, but he doesn't take it." The guy's just looking at me. I was like, whatever. They never twigged to the Canadian accent.
Mhm.
That should be your first clue. Do I sound like a native?
Yeah. Well, when I was down there, or we were down there, Mel and I were both there. That was about 2006, I think,
Yeah,
or something.
I was down there from 2003 to 2007, so that'd be about right.
Yeah, I remember one of the what I found one of the most interesting and funny parts of the trip was when, like, we rented a car from Enterprise, and they pick you up and drop you off. So a guy came to get us at the hotel to take us to drop off the car and then take us to the airport. So this is to head back, and he was saying, "So where are y'all from?" And we said, "Oh, from Western Canada." He says, "Oh, what Canada, huh? What season is it up there now?" That was the first question, and
Yeah,
I almost reacted like you did, but I thought, okay, cool heads will prevail. And I said, because this was spring, I think that I was down there. It was like
I
April.
think you're right. You never told me that story.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, there's another one too. And I said, yeah, it's spring, just like it is here. You know, it's certainly not as hot as it is here. Oh, he said, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. And then there's like probably 5 seconds of silence, and he goes, "You guys got country music up there in Canada?" That was his second question. And I said, well, I mean, if you've ever heard of like, you know, Shania Twain or Anne Marie or somebody like that, you know, yeah, you know, they're Canadian artists, you know, like, you know, blah blah blah. So he's like, oh, really, really? I'm like, yeah, 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 yeah. We've heard of it. We've heard of it. Yeah. So,
Jesus.
yeah.
One of Lauren's friends asked her if we had cows in Canada. And
Cows.
she goes, really? You might want to rethink that question. And he goes, well, I don't know. What would they eat? Isn't it all tundra?
Yeah, it's all snow. Yeah. No.
And another time, the guy's gig on the campus was he looked after there was a nice concert hall. The music building was the arts theater and music building. It was state of the art. I got there in August. It had opened in January. It was brand spanking new, beautiful building with a beautiful recital hall. But there was also a huge auditorium on the campus. And this guy's gig was to look after, I can picture him, I can't remember his name, was to look after that auditorium, look after the bookings, provide the sound and stuff like that, and then also provide the sound all across the campus. So if somebody needed a PA in a lecture room or whatever, that was his gig. And I guess it was enough to keep him, busy 35, 40 hours a week. And there was some event where they'd asked for some music students to play, and they wanted a brass quintet, which I coached through brass quintet too. So he was there to set up minimal amount of sound reinforcement, probably just something to talk through, because the students, I would have coached them on how to introduce themselves and so on. So we're listening to the stuff, listening to the kids play, and he turns to me, he's like, so you're from Canada, eh? I was like, yeah. He's like, so whereabouts in Canada? And I was like, well, if I say Dundas, Ontario or Hamilton, he's not going to know. He might have heard of Toronto. So I'm like, well, I would, it's from, I lived in a place about 40 miles west of Toronto. It's called Hamilton. I said, but close to Toronto. Toronto, eh? I was like, yeah. He's like, so would have been just a short afternoon drive to the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, just a couple minutes.
And I was like, there's no nice way out of this. I got to tell him and, be truthful. And he's going to be embarrassed. I'll say it as politely as I can. I said, well, actually, Toronto to the Arctic Circle is farther than Toronto to Abilene, Texas. How about those Cowboys?
Yeah, right.
And then we segued to football.
Well, I told you on one of these videos, I think the initial video we did when we touched off on being in Texas, about, is it Casey that played lead alto in your big band?
Yeah.
Where he said to me, so yeah, you're from Canada too, huh? Do you speak French? I said, well, I speak some, but I'm not fluent. He goes, oh, I thought you'd be fluent. And I said, well, do you speak Spanish? He goes, no. I said, well, you're closer to the Mexican border than I am to Quebec. And he just kind of sat there looking at me like, well.
Clueless. Yeah.
You ask a question like that, you get an answer like that.
Yeah. I remember being at the very first time when school starts, they do something called opening chapel, because out of the 75 days of classes, give or take, because they do 15 weeks down there, the terms here in Canada are shorter. And we talked about that one time. And they're like, really? I was like, yeah, it's like 13 or 14 weeks. There's like 15 here. What's up with that? And I was like, well, I should not to be, kind of braggadocious. I said, but Canadians are generally smarter than Americans. I said, we can get the shit done in 13 or 14 weeks. I said, you guys need 15. And they're just looking at me to see if I'm kidding or not, which I wasn't. Mm-hmm. And then I'd laugh so they'd think I was kidding. And they would, opening chapel, they would parade of flags. So students, because there was an international component and of course a national component, they were coming from everywhere in the States to go there. Christian University, Church of Christ denomination. So the students, they'd pick a representative from each state, a student that was there from a particular state, particular country, and they'd have the march around the arena. Oh, this took place in the basketball arena that seated about 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. because the student population would have been around 4,000, not a big school at all. And then with all of the faculty and staff and all that stuff, maybe there'd be 4,500 people there. And they would announce which state was coming out, which flag. So I'm paying attention, right? It would take me a few minutes, but I could sit down and write out the names of all 50 states. So I'm paying attention and I'm thinking as they're going by. And at the end of it, I'm like, there was no there was no Rhode Island. So I'm like, I said, so I guess I said, I was paying attention. There's no students from Rhode Island. And they were kind of not really impressed. They were like, what? They were inquisitive. Excuse me. I was like, no, they went through all of the states and the countries. And I noticed there was no flag from Rhode Island. Oh, uh-huh. And then I was like, anywhere else, somebody might have been impressed with the fact that I noticed that. But Americans think that the rest of the world knows everything there is to know about America. This is the greatest place in the world. So of course I would know the names of all 50 states, and I would notice that Rhode Island was missing. So that taught me a lesson, was like, don't show off about how much you know about the states.
But why wouldn't they know about it though? That's what I wonder.
Well, they might have noticed, but they weren't impressed with the fact that I noticed. They just took it as, of course he would notice. America's the greatest place in the world, and of course he would know all 50 states.
Well, you mentioned road stories, and here's one that I never told. Not that it's a big deal, but the guy that I was talking to was one of my road mates. He wouldn't react like, or he didn't react like you just said that the person you were talking to about Rhode Island. But we were on a bus, and we just finished a gig in Phoenix, or Tempe actually, at the ASU campus, and our next gig was in El Paso, the El Paso Civic Center. So I remember we're on the bus and the guy's like, oh yeah, we play in El Paso tomorrow night. He said, well, that should be easy because, we just drive through Arizona and then we're in Texas. I said, no, you have to drive through New Mexico first. He's like, no, you don't. I said, yeah, you do. I said, yeah. And I started to get into it with him. I said, it goes California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. He said, oh man, at the end of Arizona, that's where we go into Texas. I said, okay, you need to open up a map and just take a look at this. So I said, I'll leave that with you. And then he did. He came back later. He said, yeah, okay, New Mexico first. Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Mm-hmm. But anyway, for the record, we're at about 40 minutes now. So, oh, and you froze. Hello. Oh, there you are. Okay, we're about 40 minutes now.
Okay.
So I was saying, what were you saying? Sorry.
The people that I came across down there had no clue about Canada. They didn't even know. They're like, what do you all call those places there? Are they states or counties? Or I was like, yeah, they're called provinces. Oh, is that right, eh? I'm like, yeah. Clueless.
We are your landlocked neighbor. You might want to just, check us out once in a while.
Little world. And I think the results of the last political election in the States and how Texas voted is evidence of how small-minded they are and how clueless they are about the rest of the world. Not to speak ill of them, because somebody told me one time, mentioned this, and I'm gonna copy them. Individually, they're lovely people, and I noticed that individually, I met so many lovely people that were always so helpful. Right? Collectively, it's another story. And I was like,
oh yeah, I've got a ton of friends that are south of the border and relatives and stuff too. I mean, I had one guy, bass player friend of mine that I've known since the early 90s at one of the camps I was at, called me up and he said, man, I'm coming up to Canada. I got a gig up there. I said, okay, well, where are you going? Are you coming up my way? He says, well, let me check and see the itinerary. So he goes away from the phone. I hear the shuffling of paper stuff. He goes, okay, I got it here. And he's looking down like this. He's going, oh yeah, it's in Thunder Bay. Is that anywhere close to you? I said, well, that's probably about 30 hours drive. So I don't think I'll be going. He says, oh, that's too bad. I said, well, I said, it's probably like you having to go from, I don't know, what it would be, San Francisco to Denver, maybe. Something like that, or even further. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what the equivalent would be down there, but I said, yeah, I'm probably not going to make it. But thanks for thinking of me.
Clueless. No, they don't pick up books.
Yeah.
They don't look at a map. They don't, they're very insulated and very isolated.
Yeah. And I mean, if we lived in Europe or Asia or Africa or something like that, where, I would expect that they probably wouldn't know a lot. But the fact that we're landlocked neighbors, I mean, in all honesty, we do know more about them than they do about us, for sure. So,
yeah.
And that's just how that worked out. But whatever.
Well, let's wrap this one up.
But if you've learned anything today, remember California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. That's how that shit works, says the Canadian guy. Yeah. And I'm sure he's thinking, gee, I have a Canadian telling me about my own country's geography. Well, as a matter of fact, yes, you do.
Right. Oh, my goodness.
But anyway. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. This is...
wrap it up, and we'll pick it up next time with more Texas stories and shit.
Okay. All right. See you later, all. See y'all.